Hi everyone, welcome to this mid-week update. Now when you see me putting up a video in the middle of the week, that means there are something very important I want to share with you all as soon as possible. So this past Tuesday, June 28th, the FDA Vaccine Advisory Committee met with the CDC, Pfizer, Moderna, Novavax, and WHO representative and discussed booster strategy for the upcoming fall season. The meeting was all day and the end result is that the committee voted 19 yeses and 2 noes on recommending a Omicron specific booster for the fall. There were actually several somewhat surprising data presented during the meeting, and I'm going to share those with you and also discuss some of the implications and potential problems that I see. So let's get started. So let's look at the first table presented here. The CDC presented this by highlighting the vaccine effectiveness against hospitalization after the third dose in adults with normal immune system, that means immunocompetent. Now basically within 2 months of the third dose, the effectiveness against hospitalization is between 90 to 93% for everyone, but after 180 days or 6 months, it drops to about 73 to 79% for people 50 and above, which is not that bad. But what was surprising was its effectiveness in people 18 to 49. It was averaged at 54% with a range between 25 to 72. That is a huge variation. Now we would think young people should do better, right? So let's compare to this second table that was actually also CDC dataset presented in their own meeting back on April 20th. Now this table breaks down the 2 versus 3 doses effectiveness and time since the last dose in people over 50 years old and by immunocompromised status. Now let's focus on the green dots, particularly the one that is here that I'm highlighting here. Now for people over 50 years old who had 2 doses for more than 300 days, almost a full year, the 2 doses effectiveness against hospitalizations in immunocompetent people above 50 is 66%. Wait a second, right? Which is better than the 3-dose effectiveness in people under 50 years old that we just looked at. So this data doesn't make sense at all. Now the only reason I think that could be happening is how they defined COVID-associated hospitalizations. Now, many more younger people could be hospitalized due to other conditions, but also tested COVID positive, now which may make the observed effectiveness lower than it actually is. The problem is that there may be some questionable things or errors happening when they process the data. The second surprise is that the 3 vaccine manufacturers, Pfizer, Moderna, and Novavax, come to different conclusions about what kind of booster to use for the fall. Let's look at Pfizer first. They have been clinically testing the next booster of either the original vaccine, an Omicron BA.1 specific vaccine, or a bivalent mix of the original and BA.1 booster in human clinical trials. So interestingly, Pfizer did not see the benefit of a bivalent vaccine in terms of boosting neutralizing antibody levels compared to just using a BA.1 specific vaccine. But now we see Omicron BA.4 and BA.5 in more than 50% of the cases here in the US. Pfizer is already showing us that their BA.1 specific vaccine performs worse against BA.4 and 5. Now let's move on to Moderna. They also did some similar clinical studies, but they find something quite different. They found that their bivalent vaccine was needed for durability based on some very earlier experiments. So they actually tested a beta variant versions as well, and they saw that with a bivalent vaccine, it can last much longer. This slide shows how the waning was more dramatic for monovalent beta formula vaccine. So basically, Pfizer told us that a monovalent vaccine with just the BA1 specific antigens or spike protein is good enough. But Moderna is saying the opposite. They said a bivalent vaccine with both the original and the BA1 is better. Now moving on to the third manufacturer, it is Novavax. Now, even though they are still not officially being authorized by the FDA for their COVID-19 vaccine, nevertheless, they were still invited to the meeting. Now, they showed the committee that their original vaccine as a booster 8 months after the 2-dose primary series had comparable boosted IgG level across BA1, BA2, and also BA5 that were as good as targeting the original virus. They also find in an animal study, which was a type of monkey, that either the original vaccine or a BA.1 vaccine would be good to produce a more universal-like antibody response. Now, the graph showed no advantage of using a bivalent vaccine. Now, in other words, Novavax doesn't think a BA.1 specific vaccine is absolutely needed, but if the FDA wants that, they will update their vaccine. The third surprise was that Pfizer surprised the committee and actually everyone and presented fresh data testing a BA.4 and BA.5 vaccine formula in mice. Now, this is a mice study. Now, this slide was a little bit blurry. It was captured from their presentation during the meeting on the video. Now, this slide shows that this vaccine worked very well against all Omicron variant, but it has not been tested in humans, and it is also not likely to get that done before October. The fourth surprise was from the WHO. Now, without going into too much data, the WHO suggested achieving a broader immunity with a booster, which is unlike the FDA's approach to have a variant-specific booster. And basically, they said a booster with both the original virus and BA.1 would be a good idea, and there's no need to have a specific BA.45 booster. The last surprise was the vote outcome. Not every member agreed on updating the vaccine with the Omicron component. Dr. Henry Bernstein and Dr. Paul Alford voted against the recommendation. A quick reminder, I have mentioned Dr. Alford in my older videos. Now, he is one of the most prominent vaccine experts in the US, and the main argument was that there is a high chance that a new variant would come along by the fall, and making a specific Omicron variant vaccine or booster would not be very applicable or targeting by that time. To wrap up everything, here are some of the problems I think that was happening with all of the presented data, and I'm just gonna talk it through it with some of the script that I have in front of me instead of making another couple slides. Now, first, there are no clinical data, and everything was about antibody levels, and we don't know, for example, how a twofold increase in antibodies level translate into clinical improvements. We don't know how well these updated booster can protect against infection, and we also don't know how long the effect would last. But because they are still using the same platform, and it may only last for about the same duration as the third dose. Now, second, there was no data on T cells and memory B cells responses. The FDA continues to say that this is too difficult to measure and standardize, and it's difficult to map it out of the effectiveness in the real world. But something that is difficult does not necessarily mean it is impossible to do. Now, I'm sure if the FDA requires the manufacturer to submit these data, they would do it. They would have to do it. And it's not like that they don't have the resources to do it. So I think the FDA really need to step up the plate and be the guy to ask for those data. And third, if the FDA decided to go with a BA4, BA5 specific data, there's no way to have human clinical data before the fall, and we would have to only rely on animal study data. Now, so I'm sure not everyone is comfortable with just animal data, including some of the committee members. And yes, I know flu vaccines don't go through clinical trials every year, but we have to understand we know about flu vaccine very well, and generally flu vaccines has much less side effect. Now, the last point I want to bring up is about kids. Now, some of you asked me about my opinion, my thoughts about vaccine use in babies. This is a complete different huge topic for another discussion. But what I think the tricky point is that these vaccines, the effectiveness presented during an earlier meeting this month, they give us a number that sounds pretty good. But with the rapid mutations and also the vaccine waning, it's not likely to hold for very long, that reported effectiveness. Some of the discussions were about rolling out modified vaccine for the adults alongside with the kids versions. Now, I'm not sure if everyone would be comfortable with limited clinical data for a child. So that is something to think about, and as a parent, I would be very, very cautious. So that is all of the summary and my thoughts on the latest FDA Vaccine Advisory Committee meeting. So just a little bit heads up, I was 100% sure exposed to at least 3 different individuals that were symptomatic COVID patients, but I was okay. So I'm going to share with you some of my thoughts and why I was okay, and some studies that potentially explaining what had happened to me. So stay tuned for the regular video this Sunday, and meanwhile, please again stay safe, stay healthy, and take care. Bye.